One thing I love in your books, I love when anyone does this, but you do this often, is that where you sort of say some uncomfortable truth that both sides don't like. So, there's one or two essays where you talk about sort of like the poor and how they're morally blameworthy.
Oh yeah.
And then like, I think that's like, the people on the left would say that's horrible. But then I think at one point you compare them unfavorably to like the poor from the third world. Right. And I think you do this maybe implicitly in the stuff on the success sequence. It's like, those people like in the, poor people in the Philippines or Mexico, like, that you could say it's not their fault, but like America, and that's a terrible message to left-wing people. That's a terrible message to right-wing people who are more nationalist, right? But I mean, your view is that we should blame the poor for their circumstances, and the first world poor are probably the most blameworthy people of all. Is that right?
Right. You're overstating a bit, but yes, just to say that bad behavior is one important cause of poverty, that's what I will definitely stand up for. Right. I mean, of course, honestly, a lot of the poor children, and I wouldn't blame them at all. It's not their fault. Their parents don't have their acts together. Right. There is this old saying of, oh, well, you're blaming them for choosing the wrong parents, which is, an obvious dig at how unfair that is. And I say, yeah, it's unfair to go and blame poor kids because their parents don't have their act together. Unfair to blame people in the third world because they happen to be born there. And both, it's the same arguments. You don't choose your parents. It's not your fault for that. But on the other hand, if you're an able-bodied adult and you won't get out of bed and go and do a job, then that seems pretty bad, right? Or if you have kids that if you have unprotected sex when you are not prepared to support a child, right? This seems like very blameworthy behavior to me. What is the plan exactly, right? And by the way, one of the things that I find most fascinating in reading research on this, often it's by very left-wing sociologists who would never go and blame the poor for anything, but the best ones are still very empirical. They actually talk to people and they report what the people actually say. So there's a great book called Promises I Can Keep about single moms. What you find is that no one on earth has a more negative view of the parents of the children of single moms than the single moms themselves. They just think these guys are terrible, right? And they describe their bad behavior. And all right, we haven't. There's actually a follow-up book by one of the authors on the single dads, so we get their side as well. But it really, whatever perspective you're coming from, a lot of it is just guys have unprotected sex without thinking about the future, and then they have a kid and they don't feel like taking care of the kid, and then the kid has a really tough life.
Yeah. None of this is like, none of this I think is like should be surprising, like intuitively that there's people with bad judgment. And it's funny that the lack of blameworthiness, I mean, another thing you point out is basically it's very selective, right? They'll say, it's society or it's racism or the greed of capitalists. And it's never like, well, those people aren't, responsible for their circumstances. There's always blame. I've never seen the ideology that doesn't put the blame on somebody somewhere.
Yes. I mean, if you just think about how eager to blame the cancellation movement is. This one person said one wrong thing, let's destroy his life. Right. But, like if you were to go and say, well, like, is it really the Nazis' fault? Like he grew up in a racist culture. Of course he is this way. You can't blame him for that. This is where almost everyone will draw the line and say, no. He had a choice. It's like, all right, well, I agree. Yeah. You don't have to be a Nazi. And you know what else? You don't have to have unprotected sex. You don't have to drink when drink on the job. There's like all of this stuff are things that you don't have to do. And furthermore, this is not a big ask either. I mean, it's true. So if someone were to say, sure, this person could work his way out of poverty, would require him to go and work on a fishing boat in Alaska, and and that's the only way he can escape from poverty. And are you really going to blame that person when he just doesn't want to go and give up everything that he has to live to be on a boat in the Arctic? And it's like, all right, I can understand that, but it's just a matter of will you get out of your bed and show up at your job on time? Like any old job, just being a greeter at Walmart or wherever. Will you go and provide for your kids? Will you refrain from drinking when you need to be sober? Very basic stuff like this. This is not a big ask, and of course, it is these are major causes of poverty, and of course, just generally having your life messed up. Right. Of course, there always is some deeper philosophical story of no, they can't possibly help it. Here I've got some Other work where I actually just go over, well, what is the evidence on how, on the responsiveness of this kind of behavior to incentives? So for example, there's good evidence that the demand for alcohol is actually quite elastic. Right? When you raise the price of alcohol, this leads to substantial reductions in drinking, which to me says, look, to say that a person can't stop drinking and then you raise the price and they stop, it shows they could have before. Right. So if changing, this is the deeper philosophical point, but it just says if changing someone's incentives changes their behavior, it shows that they were capable of changing their behavior before. They just didn't want to, given the previous incentives.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing that gets to me, I was watching some activist interviewed, and he said, we have to treat drug addiction like a disease, like any other disease. So there's no more blameworthiness. It's like someone gets a disease or a physical disease, and I'm like, look, it doesn't work like that. If you take someone with cancer and you put a gun to their head and say, don't have cancer anymore, that doesn't work. It doesn't respond to incentives, right? And like, what an insult to say these people who are smoking crack or doing heroin are in the same position of unblameworthiness as someone who gets cancer or someone who has a stroke or something. I just find it morally it's just awful. To make those things equivalent.
Yeah, speaking of our strange tendency to think alike, I actually have an article on the economics of mental illness with a whole section on this gun, what I call the gun to the head test. Like if you actually get incentives high enough, does this lead to a change in behavior, which shows that there is a difference between what people call mental illness and regular old physical illness. Yeah, you can't just say, yeah, you're right. You're totally right. I think the paper from 2005, in a way, it's my article that I was most pleased that I was able to publish it. I actually didn't publicize it until it was in print. Because even before cancellation was a thing, I was thinking, this is something that's so incendiary. I could actually see someone trying to go and get the editor to pull the plug on this article, and I really wanted it to see print.
Did you bring up Mao and sort of how Mao got rid of opium addiction in China?
So I don't think I did that one. There were a number of other articles on just the price sensitivity, and there's actually a kind of therapy for addiction that just consists in, if you've been conforming, then you get better treatment and you get goodies and money, and if you don't, then you can lump it. Right. So, and it seems, it's rated as one of the more effective treatments.
Yeah. It's the cross-cultural stuff too is very interesting. And you have, poor traditional societies where they have no drugs and they have no legitimacy. And then you have like richer societies that do it. And you have some richer societies that, don't have these things. So obviously what's a culture? A culture is something that, creates incentives to do things or not do things through, shame. So through both financial stuff and through just sort of social interaction. And clearly these things. So yes, drug addiction and like bad behavior more generally, it clearly follows the pattern of things that we consider in people's control. It doesn't follow the pattern of cancer or AIDS or dwarfism or something that's clearly physical.